Today's episode of On Orbit is brought to you by AVL Technologies, an industry-leading manufacturer of multiband and multi-orbit satellite communications ground terminals for military, government, and commercial applications. Based in Asheville, North Carolina, AVL's visionary approach to engineering and designing mobile satellite antenna technology incorporates customer collaboration, along with superior service and support to ensure that customers' requirements are met for today's most important missions. AVL products feature reflector sizes ranging from 60 centimeters to 5 meters and enable efficient and cost-effective voice, video, and data connectivity without the need for specialized training. For more information on AVL's reliable and rapidly deployable multi-band, multi-orbit satellite systems, visit avltech.com. That's avltech.com. Thank you so much to AVL Technologies for supporting today's episode. And now, on to the interview.
In this week's On Orbit episode, we're joined by Patrick Shannon, CEO of TrustPoint, which won the Startup Space Pitch Contest at Satellite in March. TrustPoint is building a commercial GPS system and working toward its own constellation of around 300 satellites in LEO to offer GPS services that have more affordable precision, better security, and greater availability. Shannon breaks down some of the limitations of traditional GPS and why we're now seeing more commercial businesses like TrustPoint looking to provide new solutions to GPS challenges. He also previews what's next for the startup as it shifts out of an R&D phase and into more demonstrations and testing with customers and partners. I'm Rachel Jewett, and you're listening to On Orbit, the podcast that asks, what's our future in space? Hi, Patrick. Welcome to the On Orbit podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and congratulations to TrustPoint on your Startup Space win. How do you feel after winning Startup Space?
It's been really great. I think it's a pretty high profile pitch competition within the space sector and some of the deep tech space related sectors. And it was kind of right in the middle of the show, so you get a lot of participation, pretty big audience, and it's paid off. Obviously, folks that heard our pitch and wanted to learn more came and found us. We got some great inbound leads from that. But additionally, actually just winning the prize, bringing home the grand prize there and generating some press coverage around that has been beneficial. Folks that hadn't heard about us started to hear about us, reaching out. Folks that maybe had heard about us a long time ago are now seeing the progress we've made, even in the last couple of months, reaching back out. And, I can't complain. It's been really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm not sure exactly how many years Startup Space has been around. I know it's been a number of years, and there's been some pretty big names that have won or been part of Startup Space. I remember Leo Labs, and I think Astroscale was an early winner also. So it's very cool to see, how many companies have come through that competition.
No, absolutely. And we're excited to be part of the cohort and, hopefully we can go on and generate some of the big successes those other companies have in their fields within our field as well.
Yeah. So, tell me a little bit more about what was the experience like for you? Like, how did you prepare? And did you have, what was it like to present your pitch in a short amount of time to the group of investors?
Yeah, so I thought it was really good, and we definitely wanted to put some time in and prepare for it. The conference is pretty high profile. This particular event has been well known. Like you've mentioned, it's been around for a while, so people track it. They want to see who the finalists are that are coming to the event to pitch live. And to that extent, we did not treat this as kind of a nice little opportunity. We said, hey, this is a headliner event. Let's get out there. Let's make sure we get our best foot forward. And I felt like we did that. Definitely 5-minute pitch is a lot to get into, especially within space where you often have some very complex systems, technologies, approaches of getting to market. I think we had an opportunity, just finally tune and polish our story to where 5 minutes was actually more than we needed. We ended about 20 or 30 seconds early, and perhaps I could have used that for other things, but I got some great questions afterwards, great follow-up, and I have to applaud the Via Satellite team, as well as Rafferty Jackson and the folks supporting her that put on that event. It was a really, really fantastic time.
Yeah, my colleague Jeff, he's super passionate about it and he does a fantastic job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, to get into TrustPoint, obviously, I don't give us your whole pitch. But what were some of the key points of your pitch? I want to hear that, and then I'll get into my own questions about TrustPoint.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the first thing to kind of recognize in our pitch or just in our story in general is that GPS is like super critical to our modern way of life and the global economy, right? So we have our economic activity that's being driven off of it and how we experience our day-to-day life, whether that's Google Maps, location-based searching, time and synchronization for our phones, our wireless networks, our energy and our power grid. It permeates everything and we rely on it in a way that a lot of people aren't that cognizant of. And to that extent, there's a lot of problems with the current services. Now, the services we have today are fantastic given the context. The United States Air Force, Space Force now came up with these things 50, 60 years ago and have spent the better part of half a century building and deploying a crazy vision that has honestly changed the world. However, they're relatively old systems, right? Even the architectures, we launch new satellites, we put a new coat of paint on them, we add a channel here and there. But the architecture, some of the fundamental concepts of how GPS works, how it's built, how the system is designed and operated, date back to the 1970s, potentially to the late 1960s, depending on how you want to count for things. And there's a lot we can do to change. Now, given some of that kind of older nature, archaic nature of the system, there's a couple of perpetuated problems here. The first one is the price of precision. And precision GPS has existed for a while in different forms. The military has their own precision GPS. We have a lot of commercial grade augmentation and correction services that give you precision, but those services can often be pretty expensive, sometimes costing hundreds or thousands of dollars per user. So while the technology exists, it's almost out of reach for a lot of the applications that need it, especially things today where we'd love to have precision in every device, but it's only a Boeing 787 or a $1 million John Deere combine that can actually afford it. Right. So that's the first major one. I wanted to get that across. Second major issue is it's the security issue. And today, GPS is one of the last remaining unencrypted services that we use on a day-to-day basis, right there next to SMS texting. And that's a problem. Now, historically, it made a lot of sense to do that for various technical reasons. And we do have military encrypted signals for military users, but the civil commercial world is still working on an open ICD. And that means it's very easy to fake. In fact, it wouldn't take a grad student more than a couple hours and access to GitHub and Amazon to build a spoofing device. There's open source code out there. There's hardware that's commercially available to do it. And that's a big issue, right? Given how prevalent this service is in our day-to-day life. And the final major issue that I wanted to get across from, kind of in the scheme of the problems is availability. And jamming is on a rise globally. We see it in the Middle East, we see it in Eastern Europe, we see it in the Asian Pacific. We even saw it here in the United States in 2022. Two major airports were shut down, Denver International and Dallas Fort Worth, for the better part of a day due to GPS interference. Airplanes couldn't leave the gate, airplanes couldn't land. We essentially halted traffic through those particular hubs. And that's a big economic hit, but it also ruins a lot of people's day when that happens. So those threats are on a rise. That jamming is an issue. We also have a lot of activity in urban environments that aren't being met, aren't being served the services they need. Precision, street level, Manhattan, downtown San Francisco, downtown London, downtown Singapore. And to that extent, these problems need to be solved. And we see the best way to go after these is a clean sheet design of a GNSS system. So, like you said, I don't want to give you the full pitch, but the idea is that if you start from scratch today and design a GPS-like system or a GNSS system, it's going to look very different than the heritage systems. And at TrustPoint, we're moving from medium Earth orbit down to low Earth orbit. We're moving to different frequencies, specifically C-band. Our satellites are a lot smaller, but we have a lot more of them. We're adding some advanced security features, and everything is by design software defined. And those allow us to address a lot of the problems I just talked about in a way that gives us the ability to deliver very affordable precision, high security, and availability around the world in all environments. And to that extent, we've had some great traction, and we're currently supporting U.S. government and a few commercial entities and partnerships. And it's been exciting in that regard. So I guess those are kind of some of the key points
Yeah.
from my pitch.
Yeah, awesome. So as TrustPoint, is the company planning to launch its own satellites?
Yeah, so we
Okay.
are building a sizable constellation.
Okay.
It comes down to it, a little over 300 spacecraft, maybe as many as 350 spacecraft, but they're relatively small. And we have quite a bit of experience on the team. We spent a lot of time early in our lifetime as a company finding a way to reduce the cost of the space segment. And when you talk, a lot of times you say, "Hey, I'm building a big constellation." People immediately start thinking of billions of dollars. But with our technical decisions, even though we're building 350 satellites, we don't need another billion-dollar constellation. In fact, we'll be able to build ours for less than $100 million.
Hmm.
It's part of our secret sauce, and we're pretty excited about that.
And you were with Astro Digital before TrustPoint, is that right?
That was, yep.
Okay. And that's a manufacturer. So are you bringing some learnings from that experience into TrustPoint?
Absolutely. So a lot of the work I did at Astro Digital was in support of various telecom missions. And, while I was there, I was supporting some IoT players, some broadband players, some lasercom players, both commercial as well as defense-centric missions. I had a chance to lead, 6 different satellite programs directly, and all of those experience kind of informed some of my early hypotheses about the GPS world as an opportunity to go get into, disrupt, and build a new service.
Yeah, interesting. Um, okay, so is TrustPoint manufacturing its satellites, or are you going to be ordering from another company?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to partner. So our core
Okay, yeah,
competence is really in the satellite payload,
yeah.
building radios that produce good signals, and then buying spacecraft.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And then, talk to me about the business model. Like, do you foresee this as both government and commercial? What types of commercial companies might be interested? And, then I have separate questions about working with the government.
Yeah.
Does the government have concerns about getting GPS or GNSS from a private company?
Sure, sure. Great question. So, as we look at it today, we're probably about balanced 50-50 commercial and government today,
Yeah.
as far as how much time we're spending and the level of pull we're seeing from those different segments. I think long term, we're going to see a larger growth in commercial activity. And part of the reason is
Okay.
there's just way more users out there that are civil commercial GPS users than military users. Even if we were to include other foreign militaries, either allied or closely aligned geopolitically. So in that regard, long term, we're going to be a commercial first company, but we have a great opportunity to support some of the more critical defense missions today, national security type operations, and we're definitely going to be doing that at least in the near term for the U.S. government and some of our close allies.
Yeah. So I saw that TrustPoint recently received a small business technology transfer.
So it's part of the SBIR STTR
Yeah.
program. And
Okay.
they're very similar type contracts, but we received a phase two award. It's about a $1.65 million contract. And in this particular effort, this is for AFWERX, so this is a U.S.
Mhm.
Air Force funded effort. We'll be developing some advanced applications, and this comes from, it's one thing to provide PNT or position navigation and timing services from space. That's your GPS.
Yeah.
But when you own the satellite and you own the signal, there's some other things you can do with it. And so we're going to be investigating and maturing some of those applications for the Air Force.
Interesting. But it's clear that there's an appetite from the US government to for commercial companies to be innovating in this area.
Yeah, hugely so. And in fact, you can just look at government budgets and you're starting to see a big shift in momentum. Obviously, the GPS program, the Heritage program, gets a lot of funding every year. But even in the last 12 months, we're seeing reallocations across DOT and DoD to the tune of almost $100 million in support of small commercial and often venture-backed businesses looking to provide commercial solutions to GPS problems. And it's definitely, not intended to replace GPS, and I'll
Yeah,
be clear
right.
about that. There's this great opportunity to provide a fantastic complement to the Heritage GPS system. That system today supports over 6 billion users. It provides a great signal set. It's a stalwart in the navigation space. It set the standards across the industry starting as early as the early 90s. And to that extent, I don't think it's going anywhere. It also has some very bespoke capabilities that it supports for the United States military. Now, that said, sometimes it feels like GPS is kind of a one size fits most type service.
Mhm.
And the civil commercial user groups in each individual application, they all have different requirements. And there's an opportunity with new commercial providers like TrustPoint to start building diversity to address different applications' pain points in a more focused manner. And so, what TrustPoint will be able to bring to bear for the automotive or commercial aviation sectors will be, a better solution than folks just trying to use those, the heritage GPS signals within those applications as well.
Yeah.
So there's a nice diversity and complementary nature to it.
Okay. Can you give an example of what that would look like for the automotive industry?
Sure. So the automotive industry, and in particular, self-driving cars, right, which is the
Yeah.
upcoming application. Often it feels like it's just around the corner all the time, but it will come. And we have seen, growth of limited operations of self-driving cars and fleets and services in various cities around the country. And one of the things they have to think about is the performance, reliability, and safety of their vehicles. They also have to think about scalability, right? And so when you start talking about these cars, they're going to operate where there's the most people, and there's the most people in urban environments. Well, urban environments have some of the biggest issues with GPS, either obfuscation of the satellites, right? Satellite flies behind a building and you can't see the signal, or what they call multipath, where signals come down, they bounce off buildings, and you actually receive the same signal multiple times. And when you start receiving the same signal multiple times, it fudges your solution and you start to introduce errors. And these self-driving cars, they don't have a person in the loop for their navigation solution, right? And today there's actually quite a few folks behind the scenes keeping an eye on the fleets, ready to jump in remotely and support as needed. And that's okay for now when a company's operating 50 cars here or 100 cars there. But the goal is to scale. The goal is to scale to thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of vehicles. And you can't have a remote driver watching each one of these. So you need that precision and you need that reliability. You can't be in a position where you have to stop the service because you're getting a bad reflection off a building, or you're not seeing enough satellites because you're deep in the urban canyons of Manhattan or San Francisco. You got to be able to operate persistently. That's the experience as consumers we expect, right? You don't want to call an Uber, get in, drive a mile, and then it stops and says, "Hold on a second, I have to wait for my GPS fix." Right? You're going to be late to your meeting. You're going to get, stuck there. You're going to have to call another one. You want persistence of service. You also want to be safe, right? We need to introduce levels of safety that we've seen in commercial aviation in the automotive industry. And the best way to do that is to get them better solutions in urban environments. That's something that TrustPoint has developed a solution for. Also, securing those links. So if there's any adversarial or inadvertent attack or interference with that capability, you can ride it out and cut through it. And that's what TrustPoint's doing as well. So it's a little bit of the context around the automotive
Yeah,
applications.
absolutely. On the security side, is it just that the technology is more updated than stuff that may have been designed in the 70s or 80s, that it's able to be more secure? Can you talk a little bit more about the security aspect?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a part of it. When you go back to the source, when the GPS program started, there was no internet, there was no kind of IT backbone that the designers could look to say, "Hey, this is how we're going to distribute encryption keys." Even our encryption technologies back then were rudimentary compared to what we have today. And of course, the cybersecurity industry, which kind of manages and leads the pack on that stuff, has matured drastically since the introduction of the internet into the public space. And to that extent, there's just a lot more technologies. Now, those are things that we're adopting and implementing, both best practices and some innovative features. But the other thing to note is the US government has a backwards compatibility requirement. They are supporting billions of users. And let's say tomorrow they wanted to add encryption. Well, there's 6 billion devices that don't have the ability to support encryption. And so you would essentially leave these users high and dry. They can't do that, nor should they. And so what they need is they need a commercial company or a commercial opportunity to come in again with that clean sheet design and bring these new feature sets to bear against these various applications in a way that they're not in a position to do. they also, and this is a sidebar, military encryption and military security is different than what the civil commercial community
Yeah.
wants. There's a lot of overlap.
Mhm.
And if we're going to build a secure system, you can try to go the full military grade encryption end to end across your entire architecture, meet all these NSA requirements. But that's a difficult nut to crack, and you're going to be well over serving a lot of civil commercial applications if you go that far. So there's differing of requirements, there's new technologies, and we're addressing that backwards compatibility problem GPS has.
Yeah, that makes sense. For our dedicated on orbit listeners, this is our second episode recently about GNSS. We had Sean from Zephyr on a few weeks ago. So how does TrustPoint fit in with, there are a number of commercial GNSS startups right now. Exona Space Systems is another one. So do you see the market as big enough that it's going to support multiple companies? How do you kind of see this commercial landscape developing?
Yeah. So, the first thought here is that there absolutely is going to be space for multiple solutions,
Mhm.
and there probably should be. There's a lot of applications that need so much security and reliability that they need layered solutions. Also recognize that you got to recognize there's different layers of the value stream, right?
Okay.
And Zephyr is a great company building a fantastic, the innovative way of meshing users together to help correct each other's solutions. I've had a chance to learn a little bit about them, to talk to their one of their founders for a short period of time, and I love what they're doing. And they inhabit the user equipment segment of this overall ecosystem. And there's been a lot of innovation there, and there continues to be, and it's fantastic because that's the area where commercial companies have been playing for the last 30 years, starting with companies like Garmin and Trimble, Magellan back in the 90s. But there's still a lot of, I guess, suboptimal solutions to these larger problem sets. And every company like Zephyr solves one or two of these, three of these. It's a great way to go after some additional gains. But there's also a fundamental problem, which is all of these solutions exist because they're trying to fix a very old service. The GPS service, like we mentioned, is over 50 years old. We're trying to come up with aftermarket solutions to make this service better, right? One of the key talking points I love to share is the US government spends about $2 billion, give or take, on the GPS program every year. That includes some space stuff, that includes some launches, some user equipment, some ground infrastructure, a little bit of R&D. And that's a pretty big dollar value. However, one of those I guess methods of augmenting or improving GPS are correction data sets and augmentation technologies. And that particular market is $40 billion a year, give or take.
Wow.
So while the US government spends $2 billion putting a system in place and maintaining it, the rest of the user community spends $40 billion trying to fix it, right? We absolutely should continue those things, but one of the ways we can make those more efficient and make companies like Zephyr more effective is going back to the source. Go back to the satellite, go back to the signal, re-envision what that architecture can be with today's technologies and ecosystems, re-envision what that signal can look like, innovate across the entire technology stack. So companies like Zephyr and others can even improve more. And so we are sort of a new foundational step that these other companies can come in and step upon and even go further. And I think together there's some great complementary solutions out there.
Yeah, awesome. What's the timeline for TrustPoint?
Yeah, great question. So we've been in business for just a couple of years now. We are venture backed. To date, it's been mainly internal R&D, both lab-based, field-based, some space stuff as well. And over the next roughly 12 to 18 months, we're going to be moving out of this phase of doing a lot of internal R&D, internal development, and verification into more third-party work. So the idea is bringing in customers and partners, doing joint testing, joint development, joint demonstrations, and that would be both commercial side as well as the government side. And that'll be fun because there's an opportunity to learn from these other players in the ecosystem, but also we're going to get to the point where we're going to see what our performance is capable of, and hopefully we'll have some really fun announcements going out over the next year or so, showing the world what we can do. And we've been pretty quiet about it to date.
Yeah.
We keep our heads down a decent amount, but I think that'll be changing, especially as we get to early 2025.
Okay, cool. Uh, Are you able to share a timeline on the satellite system?
Sure, sure. I'm happy to share a little bit of information. I've talked publicly about this before. So
Okay.
we've done a couple of missions. We've got a couple of more in the works.
Okay.
We are looking to essentially, provide an initial commercial service starting in the early 2026 timeframe, give or take. There's an opportunity to get quite a few satellites on orbit between now and then to be able to do that. And then every year we'll be adding to our constellation. And each addition is going to be able to give us more coverage, more performance. And between now and roughly late 2028 or early 2029, we should have a full service on orbit and available at a global scale.
Okay. Awesome. Um, how much money has the company raised up to this point?
Great question. We don't talk too publicly
Okay.
about it, but we do have some venture backers. We've also had a great opportunity to win some government contracts. So we have a decent amount of non-dilutive funding, and we're pretty healthy. I'll say that.
Okay, sounds good. Um, it just generally, how have conversations been going since startup space? And you mentioned at the beginning that there's been some increased engagement since then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And part of it was just being able to participate in a high profile event.
Mhm.
I think there's some investors that are more keen to understand and learn the GPS space and how
Okay.
navigation is vulnerable and can be fixed.
Mhm.
I think also there's just generally been a shift in interest and focus at the macro scale. We see growing threats, right? We more often than ever before, are we learning about GPS spamming and GPS spoofing on
Yeah.
the news. We're seeing it affect public transportation, commercial aviation, telecom networks, even people's meeting schedules, cashless payment systems in the Middle East. There's all sorts of these impacts that are relatively new, and those have percolated now far enough to where both end users and product partners and investors have said, "Hey, we gotta address this. We gotta find a way to do this."
Yeah.
And they're big problems, but big problems are big opportunities. And so I think people are getting excited. And that's the thing I also try to remind folks. There's a lot of, this is a space-centric podcast. And, there's been great buzz and great coverage and kind of excitement over the past 2 decades about commercial launch, commercial Earth observation, both optical and SAR, commercial IoT, commercial broadband. And GPS is really just the natural next step of that. And I think people have finally started to recognize it in mass.
Mhm.
And I think events like this and giving TrustPoint an opportunity to share on the stage at the conference was a great opportunity to continue that dialogue and bring more people into it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point that it's like innovation is cycling through all these other types of signals, and it's GPS's turn to.
It is, and don't forget how big this market is, right? Earth observation was fun. It produces some great visuals, it produces some great analytics, but it's still a relatively small market, right? Only recently is our folks estimating it's breaking 10 billion in spend a year. Launch, depending on the estimate you look at, it's between 15 and 20. Satellite manufacturing is between 15 and 20 billion. GPS, hardware, user equipment, services, and some of the application layer, it's a couple $100 billion of spend a year. It's substantial. And that's the exciting part too, I think. It's not just the natural evolution of space entrepreneurship and opportunity, but it's also just a bigger space for companies to innovate within and capture large market shares.
Mhm. Yeah, the Space Capital has done a great job with the GPS playbook of kind of getting the word out about how much economic activity GPS underpins.
Oh, absolutely. And there are reports also out of the Department of Transportation and out of Europe, even the Middle East and the Asian Pacific, where every country is kind of saying, how much are we going to hurt if we don't have this? And how much value has been generated because we do have it? And they got to find a way to marry those up and say, hey, let's not lose it and let's continue those gains.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, what are some of your can you share any specific milestones for this year? Like what else is on the calendar for TrustPoint in 2024?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's definitely a growth year for us. There's a decent amount of hiring on our roadmap for this year, bringing in some additional skill
Okay.
sets and new functions, and that's always fun to grow a team. I think another major milestone is we're moving out of tech demo platforms for our space segment into operational class type platforms, and that's a big step up. We've learned a lot from the work we've done already. We're rolling that into something that's quite a bit more capable from a satellite side, that we'll be able to start playing with later this year, early next year. I think also we're much deeper in the product side, and we don't talk too publicly about our product partners, but we have some
Okay.
great opportunities to be prototyping this year some very experienced receiver and manufacturers, and hopefully we'll be get to a point this fall where we'll be able to talk publicly with those partners about the products that they'll be bringing to market that'll be TrustPoint enabled, and get some buzz going around those.
Yeah, awesome. Well, stay tuned for that. Where are you all based? Where's TrustPoint based?
Yeah, so we have a primary headquarters in Northern Virginia, and just east of the Dulles Airport, not too far from Washington, D.C. We got a
Mhm.
good cohort of our core engineers in that location. We also have a handful of folks out in California, so we've got some in NorCal and a few down in SoCal. So we're spread across the country a little bit, but we all travel quite a bit. And I think due to COVID and new technologies, we work quite well, or at least the remote portions of the team work quite well with the team on site.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Patrick, what has it been like for you over the past few years to be building the vision for this company and see it start to take off?
Oh, the experience has been fantastic. Best job I've had. Definitely the hardest, most energy intensive for sure. But I wouldn't trade it for any other job. And I think the whole act of building a company, it's so multifaceted. You get technical problems to solve, regulatory problems in the space industry to solve, capital problems. You got to build a team. There's a whole human resource and leadership aspect to it. And I think that's just it's very fulfilling to go into an environment like that and to tackle those problems. So I definitely got to say that I love it. It is a lot of work, and I'm very thankful that this particular mission and space in general aligns with some of my personal interests and passions, such that I can keep pretty high energy level going on this stuff.
Yeah. Was there a moment for you when you were deciding whether or not to take the leap that you were like, okay, this is the right mission. Like, I'm ready for this. What was that decision like?
Yeah, so I'd have to say it was pretty methodical. I
Hmm.
knew a long time ago that I wanted to transition out of building space systems for various companies or various government customers, and eventually go do something myself. And I learned a lot about my personal interests, personal capabilities in the market, various space sectors. Over the last 15, 16, 17 years now. And over that time frame, I was, looking for the right opportunity. And I think, late 2019, early 2020, I recognized that there was a fantastic confluence of events and personal interest in this opportunity to disrupt GPS. The first thing to note was this gradual progression of new commercial applications taking over. It started with SpaceX with launch, then we saw Earth observation with companies like Skybox and Planet. Then we started to see some IoT companies, some SAR companies, and then we started to see broadband. And it only made sense that this was the time for also, kind of
Okay.
what's the next space application? Well, one of the ones that hadn't been disrupted or really touched in a material way was GPS. And that realization, coupled with how big the market was after I started doing the business side of the research, I said, hey, this is a big market. It's ripe for disruption. The technology ecosystem is ready to support this. If you were to try to do this business 10 years ago, it would be hard. It would be
Yeah.
really hard. And today, even in the last 3 to 4 years, it's now become a reality for a venture-backed company to go build a proliferated space infrastructure to go after a big project like this. So, yeah, I would say that sort of confluence of events in my turning point happened in early 2020. But I'd been watching the market, the technology, the ecosystem for a while, and I was excited to see things come together.
Yeah, super interesting. That was all the questions that I had. Is there anything that you wanted to add for our listeners about TrustPoint before we sign off?
Yeah, I think there's some great talking points. that I love to socialize, regardless of who it's with. That I'd love to kind of throw out there. I think one of them has to, be a lot. A lot of folks look at GPS. They see a very large government budget. They see a heritage system they've been using for decades sometimes, and they say, is this really something that needs to be disrupted or
Yeah,
pursued by a
right.
commercial company? And the reality is absolutely. I've talked about the threats a little bit on this. We also have all of these nascent applications that need better performance, advanced aviation applications, self-driving cars, advanced IoT, augmented reality, and then a bunch of national security variants of those
Mhm.
that need higher precision. And the GPS system that the Air Force and Space Force operate isn't going anywhere. It's continuing to do its mission and support the warfighter and some civil commercial users. But there's a commercial opportunity to be a complement to that. And that's what TrustPoint's doing. We're coming in there and we're going to provide a really nice complement, do some things that the military system and the existing civil commercial system can't do some newer stuff, do some additional things that heritage system does. And I think that level of diversity and complementary nature is going to work wonders for both the civil commercial community and the national security users. And so that's kind of one big thing. I can't hit on that
Yeah.
more often than not. And I also think the other aspect of this that is important for TrustPoint. A lot of people look at companies in the space sector and say, "Hey, that's a big project. That's an expensive project." And I think my recognition is today you can build a constellation for a lower dollar value than ever before. And if you've done some of that work before for other companies and you know the pitfalls and you got some battle scars, you can go off and build a pretty large system for a modest dollar amount, relatively. And that's a function of the ecosystem and smart engineering. And TrustPoint's put a lot of time into that. And I think we have a path forward that's pretty exciting.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah, well, thank you
yeah.
so much. Congratulations on your startup space win, and thanks for taking the time to talk about the business with On Orbit.
Absolutely. Likewise, Rachel, appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for the questions today. And thanks again to Via Satellite and others that put on that pitch competition a couple weeks ago.
Awesome. Thank you.